Composite Gloves here, and today we're going to be doing some motion. We're going to learn about motion. So 5 types of motion. Now I'm going to break up what is typically covered in one class period over several videos with exercises in between, because if you really want to take this stuff kind of slow and really take your time to understand what everything means, this is one of those areas that it looks like they cover it kind of fast, and then all of a sudden, bam, like you're expected to be a complete like master and have this stuff in the back of your head at the like just boom, you know it. So we're going to take our time to do that. That's how you learn these things. So we say in music, right? Okay, so we're going to start writing parts, and we've talked about what that means. But in music, there are 2 possible relationships between 2 notes. So if we only write down 2 notes, there are 5 ways these notes can interact. And so one is we have static, meaning our notes don't move. So here we have a soprano and our alto, and the notes are staying the same. They don't change. In static movement, we like static movement. It gives us some advantages in part writing. Next up, we have oblique movement. One part stays the same, but the other part moves. And oblique movement is a big up for us too. We like oblique movement. The other types of movements can have some problems crop up, but we need to master the types of movements, and then we'll worry about the other problems. So, okay, we have oblique movements. One part moves, the other one doesn't. Static, they stay the same. Contrary, parts move in different directions. So one is going to go up, bam, and the other is going to go down. They go in different directions, or maybe they come together. The point is that they don't both go up and they don't both go down. Now, what about in the case where they do go the same direction? So contrary makes sense. Like, that's really easy. Now we have these 2 types for same direction. Okay, we have similar motion. That's where both our notes, they both go down or they both go up, but they go up or down by different amounts. Maybe one goes up by a second and the other one goes up by a third, or one goes up by a fifth, the other one goes up by a second, some other amount. So here we see they both go down. One only goes down by a second, the other goes down by a third. So our 2 notes can do this. And then finally we have parallel. Parallel movement is when both our notes go in the same direction by the same amount. If we want to get mathematical, they have the same slope. So that is parallel for us. So yes, so these are the 5 types of motions. You need to have these memorized. They need to be in you. So I've devised an exercise that will just ingrain these in you. Because once you do, I'm going to be able to say stuff during part writing that these terms, if you're not really comfortable with what they mean, it can throw you off. Like I'm going to say, now this one part, no matter what happens, all the other parts will have motion that is oblique to this part. And you should have an idea like, oh, we're talking about motion like this. So we do have a little bit more to talk about before we move on to the exercise. So down here, okay, so we have these things called textures, right? So a texture, when we say in a texture, textures can mean a lot of things. They can, and we have sort of words that take on different meanings under different contexts. But in this context, when we say texture, we're talking about the type of harmonies we can form with only 3 parts. So you'll see 3-part textures and 4-part textures. You'll hear that as terminology. And that just was referring to the type of things, not always harmonies. Sometimes it can refer to timbres and tonal colors and things of that nature. But in a texture, for the most part, when you hear it in this course, it's going to refer to the number of parts. Simply. It'll take on more sort of sophisticated meanings that are based on context as you go further, and it will generally be pretty clear what it means. So, but it's a word we haven't really used yet. So we say this means in a 3-part texture, there are 3 possible relationships. Okay, so if we had 3 parts, well, we've added an extra note. And so we have 3 relationships going on here, and it's our job to keep track of them. Our goal in part writing is to observe these relationships and figure out which ones are the best. How can we use this to our advantage? So we keep track of them. And we're going to learn ways to keep track of them because it can get a little daunting, especially when we come down to 4-part textures and we have 6 possible voices. It gets a little overwhelming. So in 3-part textures, we have 3 possible relationships, right? We can go from soprano to alto, and from soprano to bass, and from alto to bass. So we only have 3, and you might think that 3-part textures are easier to work with and use than 4-part textures. But you might be surprised, actually. Now, for the most part is kind of true, but it's actually also at the same time, there's a lot of problems and you'll come more and more familiar with them. 3 parts can actually be just as hard because we often run into things where we need to omit notes and we have to pick which members of the chord do we need to keep. And so sometimes we can sort of back ourselves into a corner if we're not careful. So 3 parts carry with them their own challenges. But if we were to look here, let's say we're going to analyze these textures, right? We're going to analyze, well, these parts. So we say for soprano to alto. So we have, here's the soprano and here's the alto. And it goes down, they both go down. Soprano goes down to a G and the alto goes down to an E. And they go down by the same amount. And so we call that parallel motion. Now you might be wondering, what if one moves down a minor third and the other one moves down a major third? What happens if that? Well, in harmony, it's a third. To us, it's the same. However, we do need to look at the context. It might be considered, because you might be saying that's similar motion. It's not the same interval. And you'd be right. We need to check out the context because the context reveals to us what is the role of this note. If it doesn't break the tonal structure, meaning the thing the piece is using to make sense of itself. So if we're in G major is going to be the most important chord, all these things. So if you see like chromatic movements or something, which we're going to stay diatonic, but you'll run into them every now and then just through exercises. We're not going to be writing any. Then you know, like, oh, this looks like it's outside the tonal texture. This looks like it broke or the tonal structure. And so you would call this similar motion in one case and parallel in another. But generally, if they're both like, oh, this is a third, that's a third, or this is a second, that's a second, then for the most part, it's going to be considered parallel. And also, I just want to tell you right now, don't get bogged down in these details. Just call one of them one thing. Later on, when we talk about parallels and chord movements and other things, you'll learn that like this doesn't matter as much. And a lot of the times where this is a problem, it doesn't even matter. Like with seconds, we barely ever care about this. However, with fifths, we have specific rules for that. It's called unequal fifths. And I think I have a second worksheet. The answer key actually has a little more info I filled in. As I was doing the answer key, I realized some things. So anyways, the point is, if it's not like exactly the same interval, but it's in the same scale and it's moving the same direction, if they're both thirds, then you're pretty safe calling it parallel. If you feel like, no, this is not something that would be diatonic, this isn't something that makes sense. Like for example, if we're working in a minor mode, we always make our 5 chord with a raised third, because with a raised third, that gives us a leading tone. And that's really important in tonal harmony. So we'd expect to see that raised. So if we see like that going on, you know, no alarm bells go off because we say, oh, this is expected. So of that nature, you'll see what I chose, where I chose it, and you can reason amongst it for yourself. But again, don't get too bogged down in this. These are just observations of motion. We're not going to really do exercises directly for this. This is going to be like a step and part of our analysis. So this is something we want to get good at, being able to spot relatively quickly. And then also in 4-part textures, there are 6. There are 6 possible voices. And yes, we do have to keep track of them. Don't worry though, we will come up with systems for thinking about this, because this can become quite overwhelming. But for now, we want to just do a bunch of analysis and get really quick at identifying these. So we have, okay, so now we can go soprano, alto, soprano, tenor, soprano, bass. That covers all our soprano. Then we have alto, tenor, alto, bass, and then finally we have tenor, bass. And so here we would say, and this is where also you'll start to find out whether or not you really understand what note goes to what part and the importance of proper stemming. So we say here's parallel motion. We have soprano is going up, and the alto is also going up. And we notice they go up by the same amount, so we call it parallel motion. If we look at the soprano and the tenor, the soprano goes up and the tenor goes up, but by different amounts, right? This goes up by a second, this one goes up by a third, and so we call it similar motion. If we look at soprano and bass, soprano is going up, bass is going down, and so we say that's contrary motion, and then so on and so forth. Now I adopt this for soprano, alto, soprano, tenor. You're going to see it in my worksheets. Yeah, you'll see it from now on. So if you ever see like letters together of this nature, you know generally what to expect. If I'm not spelling a chord, which it should be pretty obvious if I'm spelling a chord. Okay, so next up we have, okay, so here's our exercise. And I'll go ahead and do them with you. And then in the next video, I'm going to bring up several things that after doing this exercise, you should have come to conclusions for. You should realize this, or you should have questions about it. Because you're going to remember a lot more after doing the exercise. You're going to be like, what the heck is this? And then I'll bring it up, hopefully. Otherwise, you can ask it in the comments. Indicate the type of motion between each voice. Abbreviate using P for parallel, S for similarity. Anyways, abbreviate using these things. Use part abbreviations in the worksheet. By that, I mean this. So you want to do soprano, alto, soprano, tenor, soprano, bass. Now, you can put that between every set of notes if you want, just copy paste. Or if you really, really want to get a good knowledge of this, you'll type it out repeatedly. If you type it out repeatedly, you'll ingrain this in your head, and so you'll be able to go through a regular checklist. So I encourage typing it repeatedly if you're new to this. And then we just want to develop a systematic way. So for this, we always want to start with soprano, alto, and then we're going to go down the list. I don't want you going like over here, do soprano, alto, and then jump down to tenor, bass, then go to alto, tenor, and then all of a sudden over here you start with soprano, tenor. Like, I don't want you jumping around the list like that. That's bad practicing. We want to go from the always top down. We're developing a order. That way, when we get into analyzing, we already are in a groove. It's not like a whole new enchilada every single time. So, okay. So this is our chord. Let's go ahead. Let's do the first one, right? So we look here. We say, all right, I'm going to do the first one. And we say, all right, well, my soprano is here because we can see our stem. So we know our soprano and alto are unison, right? So that means that soprano goes up and then the alto stays the same. So that means that whenever one voice is parallel, the other ones have to be oblique because that voice doesn't move. So this one's got to be oblique. And then soprano, tenor, well, we look at our soprano, that's B. And over here we have a G. Again, a parallel voice, so that's oblique. And then the bass stays the same, and our soprano moves, so that's got to be oblique. And now we have alto, tenor. Well, none of the other voices move. They all stay the same. So we can just go static, static, static. Oops. I made it like this. You don't have to follow like, capital and lowercase and all that. But anyways, you can see you should be able to go through pretty quickly with these conclusions. There will be spots you will get stuck. You'll be like, what the heck is this? And we're going to talk about that in the next video. But go ahead, go through this, really get your motion down, get a solid groove for how you look at things. It's just going to be a handy dandy tool you're going to use the rest of the time. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments. If you're someone you think maybe you have a great exercise you'd like to contribute, or you have something you wish I had said, drop that in the comments. I want to make this as good as I possibly can. Subscribe and have a blessed day.